Okay, good morning and welcome to the Friday, June 5th meeting of the MCE TechCom Committee. May we have the roll call, please?
Hi, this is Jessica. Can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
And I think when I said yes, I could, we could hear you say, can you hear us? But if we can have someone call our roll, we'd appreciate that.
Hercules,
Present?
Lafayette,
Present.
Larkspur, Martinez, Pinal,
Here.
Pleasant Hill,
Here.
Vallejo. Quorum established.
Okay, thank you. And for the record, Director Zorn from Martinez is present now.
Thank you.
Okay, and then moving along on the agenda, the next item is board announcements and or discussion items. I'm just going to let everyone know that my intent is to pull item 8 and item 9. Item 8 is the modification of committee process for agenda setting. We're still working through this item, and we aren't really ready to discuss it today, but we are working on it, and hopefully we'll have more at the next meeting. Item 9 is connected to that item, and I understand that folks may have items they want to have approved. And again, we're working through that process of just sharpening the language, and then we'll come back and we'll be welcoming those at a future meeting. But intend to, again, pull item 8 and item 9. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to other board member announcements or discussion announcements. Do we have any? Okay, I'm hearing none on this side. Anything over in Santa Fe?
No members of the public present.
Okay, that was under board announcements. Okay, that's good. Then we'll move on to number 3, which is public open time. Hearing that there are none in San Rafael, we'll ask if there's anything here. I don't see anyone. Oh, maybe there's one. No comments? Okay. With that, we're moving on to the report. This is agenda item number 4, which is the report of the Chief Executive Officer.
Sorry, before we start that, Chair, can we just make sure there's nobody online? I'm just not sure if the clerk had a chance to check.
Thank you for that. I apologize.
None online.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you. All right, and then after that, again, moving forward with the Chief Executive Officer report, agenda item number 4.
Okay. Good afternoon, committee members and members of the public. I'm very pleased to share that last week, Standard & Poor's Global Ratings affirmed MCE's A issuer credit rating with a stable outlook, underscoring continued confidence in MCE's financial strength and operational resilience. According to S&P, the assessment reflects MCE's very healthy liquidity totaling $554 million, equivalent to 244 days of operating expenses. Its diverse renewable energy portfolio supported by approximately 58 long-term contracts, and its lack of outstanding debt. The S&P Global report also highlighted MCE's broad customer base of more than 600,000 accounts across 38 member communities, strong customer retention, and negligible opt-outs, all indicators of enduring stability. Next, I'd like to share some positive results from one of our marketing campaigns that you may have read about it in one of our recent press releases. A targeted campaign encouraging customers to shift energy usage outside of 4 p.m. to 9 p.m. delivered more than $380,000 in customer savings on a total campaign cost of $130,000. We saw 75% of residential and 60% of commercial customers who received direct mail shift their usage, which is a remarkable response for behavior change. It reinforces that with the right data and timely targeted outreach, we can reduce grid strain at peak demand by shifting load while delivering clear value back to our customers. We're looking forward to building on these efforts with future campaigns. Also like to take a moment and recognize one of our employees who has been named among the North Bay Business Journal's 40 Under 40 honorees. Some of you may know Mariela Herrick, our Senior Community Development Manager, whose community leadership was recognized for convening our Community Power Coalition and strengthening relationships with our customers, municipalities, and partners in Napa and Solana counties. A big thanks and congratulations to Mariela. Finally, I want to announce a couple of upcoming opportunities for engagement. We are planning 2 workshops, they are on June 24 from 4:30 to 6:30 and July 8 from 4:30 to 5:30 to invite both the public and the board to discuss and provide input on MCE's procurement practices. The first workshop will focus exclusively on Index Plus and hedges. The second will focus on resource adequacy. Both will be based on facts, options, and implications. We are looking forward to creating a space to receive input on these core issues and to engaging in an open dialogue. A diversity of fact-based perspectives makes us our work stronger, and we're committed to growing stronger together. I believe these topics are fundamental to start rebuilding mutual trust and eventually take the necessary steps for bringing to the board core policy decisions on energy and finances for our collective future by the end of the year. To support broad participation, people will be able to join from our Concord and Sound of Hill offices or virtually. Invitations from our board office clerks were already sent. Thank you.
And thank you, and then congratulations to Mariela as well in our Center of Hill office. Center of Hill office, I think is where we're located. All right, so moving on then, we move to the consent calendar. Does anyone have an item they want to pull from the consent calendar? And I guess I should ask aloud for Center of Hill, any items to pull? Center of Hill, any items? Just want to make sure we don't have anyone who wants to pull anything from Center of Hill from the consent calendar. No, seeing no there. Here in
Chair, I just want to say I was not a member of the committee, so I will just abstain from this vote.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, then there's no public comment. So if we can just have a vote on that, or a motion and a vote.
So moved for approval. Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. I think a few roll call.
Can I ask who the motion and the second is?
Sure, Director Murphy, and then seconded by Director McCormick.
Thank you. Hercules,
Aye.
Lafayette,
Aye.
Larkspur,
Yes.
Martinez,
Abstain.
Pinal,
Aye.
Pleasant Hill,
Yes.
Vallejo. Vallejo's absent. Motion carries. Thank you.
Next up. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is 2026. No, I'm sorry. It's Integrated Resource Plan proceedings. So can you have a staff report, please?
Yes, good morning, directors of the technical committee. Today, next slide, please, sorry. Today, myself, Sabrina Soldavini, Vice President of Policy, Johnny Kipiator, Principal Power Procurement Manager, and James Parker, Managing Consultant from PEA, are going to present to you kind of staff's draft 2026 IRP. Specifically, what we're asking for today is not any approval of anything. We're seeking feedback on our draft preferred conforming portfolio, PCP. It's not my acronym, it is the state acronym, so I apologize. You have to hear me say PCP 30 times. And also we'll present an alternative conforming portfolio, really seeking direction and feedback from the technical committee on the portfolio direction, trade-offs between what we are presenting, and feedback that we can take to finalize our IRP before we bring it to the full board for approval in July, before we need to submit it to the CPUC on August 10th. So I want to be clear today, we are not seeking approval, and to be clear, the IRP itself does not seek approval of specific contracts, projects, or budgets for MCE. We are really looking for feedback to finalize our IRP. Next slides, please. So I know Many of you have heard me go through the next 6 slides several times, so I'll go through them fairly quickly here. Happy to answer questions if they come up at the end. But what is the IRP? How does it work? The Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP, is the California Public Utility Commission's really umbrella proceeding for doing state planning. And really the goal is to identify diverse portfolio of resources that ensure California is meeting its grid reliability needs and California's GHG, greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. And this generally happens every 2 years. There was a little bit of a delay between 2022 and 2026 based on PUC direction. So that's why there's kind of this 4-year gap. But normally happens on a 2-year cadence. So every 2 years, the PUC goes through a very complex planning process where they build what is called a preferred system plan, or PSP. And this portfolio is based on load forecasts throughout the state policy goals, and also emission targets. And then once the PUC creates this preferred system plan, they allocate to all of the LSEs under its jurisdiction, such as MCE, a share of the reliability and GHG need for that whole planning horizon. In this instance, it's a 20-year planning horizon. So the 2026 IRP cycle is a plan that we have to prepare that goes from now through 2045. And then importantly, critically, after MCE and the other LSEs submit their plans, the PUC will aggregate all of the plans, and then it'll kind of start the next cycle, right? They'll take all of our plans, aggregate them, incorporate those into their modeling, and in some instances, they might find that based on what the LSEs have put forth, they need to issue a procurement order. But that will kind of commence this iterative 2-year cycle. Next slide, please. And I think I generally said all of this, but already, so just will flag here again, MCE is required per statute to create and submit a preferred conforming portfolio, this PCP, for submission to the CPUC, and we have to take it to the board for approval before we submit it to the PUC. And again, really the intent of our MCE's IRP is, it's kind of twofold, right? We want to make sure we're meeting all of the state's requirements, for one, but secondarily, it's critical that what we put in the IRP also aligns with what board direction, internal policy, and what we expect to be market realities. Because not only does it go into the PUC's modeling practices and really influence the market, but it also influences what MCE will procure, as you'll hear more about later. Right, the IRP is what we use to guide open season. So it is important that what we put in the IRP reflects what we actually think is available and realistic to procure in the market. Next slide, please. A little bit more specific on what's, what those requirements are and what we'll ask you to approve, or your full board in July. So in particular, we have to show how we will meet our share of this 25 million metric ton and 8 million metric ton requirement by 2045 in terms of the GHG targets. And the 3 things I will actually ask you to approve, there's 2 templates: a resource data template, which outlines essentially when we might plan to bring specific resources online, again, a plan, and also, and that shows how we are meeting our reliability need. And then there's another template, it's called the CSP, the Clean System Power Tool, that goes through and estimates MCE's GHG and criteria pollutant emissions to show that we're meeting the GHG targets. And then there's about a 100-page narrative report that we also include there. And we attached, just for reference, the 2022 IRP, so you can kind of see what those will look like when we submit them to you all in July. Next slide, please. And again, I'll probably, and I've said this a few times, just want to make sure we all are on the same page about what the IRP does and does not do, because I think it gets kind of wonky and blurry really quickly. The IRP is really important. It does set, MCE's procurement strategy for the next 2 years until we iterate a new IRP. So in that way, it can really directly impact our operational strategy and ultimately the budget. But I think it's helpful to think of it more as a really important constrained optimization problem, right? It constrains our future procurement, but it absolutely does not dictate it. It does not We don't have to build, and it's a 20-year plan. It would probably be imprudent to commit to building what's in that plan. Anything that we actually procure, any resources, contracts that MCE's procurement team wanted to move forward with would still come to your board or follow the board approved processes. So approving the IRP does not commit us to actual projects or any specific costs. And it certainly, it doesn't align with market timing or contract availability to ensure a least cost or optimal portfolio for MCE. It really utilizes the assumptions that the PUC as modeling uses, and then we can kind of tweak it a little bit, but it really is a point in time estimate of one feasible strategy we might take. And then next slide, please. And so as we're putting together, this one feasible plan that meets all of our requirements, what do we look for in putting that together? We've put together kind of these guiding principles that our team follows when we're building our preferred conforming portfolio. I'll note these aren't necessarily in any particular order, and happy to take any feedback on these from the technical committee today. But generally, as we're building the preferred conforming portfolio, first and foremost, we want to make sure that it's fulfilling MCE's mission, but also meeting all of the board approved policies, internally adopted targets, those that have to be factored into our plan. Secondarily, regulatory, compliance, state compliance targets have to be factored in. That includes meeting PUC procurement requirements as well as resource adequacy requirements. Affordability, I know we always are striving to build a portfolio that keeps costs and rates as low as possible. I think we want to be realistic that costs are probably over a 20-year horizon, they are going to look like they're rising, but we do our best to build a portfolio that to the best of our ability maintains stable and affordable rates for MCE's customers. Risk management, we want to ensure that the contract types and lengths and the resource types are also diverse in that portfolio. So risk management and technology diversity. And then the last one here, we've heard very clearly from the board and public, and MCE has missions on ensuring that we continue to invest in clean RA resources. So that's factored into our plan as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to James, who is actually going to kind of walk through a little bit more in detail some of those planning, design, constraints, and considerations, and then go through the preferred conforming portfolio that we are presenting to you all today.
All right, good morning. Excuse me. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for that intro. I'm James. I'm with PEA. My team at PEA has really worked collaboratively with, can you hear me okay? With MCE staff to help design the IRP portfolio. And like Sabrina said, I'm really here to talk. I'm going to talk about process for really how this came together, some of the methodologies there, and then I'm going to walk through the preferred portfolio, kind of what was an output from that process. Really, I think the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about some of the overarching criteria that I guess really dictates the outputs. But I want to start actually a little more basic and just talk about the fundamentals of process. So some of the templates that Sabrina was referring to, most specifically the resource data template, we start off there by reporting MCE's existing portfolio. So all of MCE's existing contracts, which kind of meet certain parameters. So I think there was 96 total existing contracts in MCE's portfolio, which really constituted the foundation for the IRP portfolio. The next piece of this, we kind of move to the planned portion. So these planned contracts really exist to bridge the gap between the existing portfolio and then what's considered a conforming portfolio in the eyes of the CPUC. And so a conforming portfolio has really a number of, I guess, requirements there. But just to start with the regulatory framework, and I think about it really as 4 bullet points that we need to make sure we're checking off for regulatory compliance. The first of these is emissions thresholds. The CPUC kind of assigns various emissions thresholds in kind of these specific years within the planning horizon, 2030, 2035, 2040, 2045. We'll get more into that here shortly, but just kind of remember that for the time being here. The next regulatory obligation that we have to check off is resource adequacy compliance. So from an RA perspective, I mentioned that in the emissions, it's for specific years, but in the RA perspective, we need to demonstrate sufficient resource adequacy capacity in every year of the planning horizon between 2026 and 2045. So that really ends up being a pretty big piece of this puzzle. Third is incremental procurement orders. So as you're aware, there's been a series of incremental procurement orders issued by the CPUC in recent years. Most recently, I think it was March 5th was the decision 26. So this dictates, as it's shown here in the first bullet, MCE needs to procure 180 megawatts of new build capacity between the years 2030 and 2032. This is something we need to make sure is reflected in the planned portfolio as well. And then lastly, from a regulatory perspective, would be making sure we're hitting our interim RPS mandates. This one ends up not being particularly relevant in the case of MCE because MCE has internal RPS objectives that far exceed those of the state. So although this is important to make sure we get it right, it does, like I said, it's not necessarily a binding constraint from MCE's perspective. So that's the regulatory piece. Another kind of key consideration here would be realities of what we're seeing in the marketplace. We need to really consider what types of resources are likely to be available as we're moving forward 10, 15, 20 years out into the future. We also need to consider what are those resources likely to cost? Obviously, that's a key consideration of all of this. Excuse me. We're able to rely pretty heavily on what's called the resolve model, which is kind of a CPUC planning model where they do a similar exercise, but at the system level. And so it's not necessarily one-to-one, but we can use this as a guide to kind of determine as we move, forward 2035, 2040, et cetera, what types of resources we can expect to be available and at what quantities. And so that's really all I had. Next slide, please. So here we'll pick back up on this idea I mentioned previously about the emissions thresholds that are assigned by the state, by the CPUC as a piece of part of this process. So like I said, the real critical years for emissions thresholds are 2030, 2035, 2040, and 2045. What we have on this table is also the annual assumed retail sales. Also, this is a state kind of assigned number. So I think that's also critical to remember. And then that bottom row shows our emissions thresholds. Obviously, we need to come in below those in each of these kind of test years. And this is measured in million metric tons of GHG emissions. Really, when I look at this, I think there's kind of two kind of competing factors that kind of are pretty critical. So if you look at the load, we're seeing pretty aggressive load growth assumptions throughout this planning horizon. And then kind of simultaneously, we're seeing pretty aggressive GHG emissions thresholds that we need to make sure that we're kind of coming in under. So this kind of really, these factors really drive the I guess the volume that needs to be procured of the specific types of renewable resources over this planning horizon in order to achieve this conforming portfolio. Just one contextual note I wanted to kind of throw in here, or just for to add something. So load 2025 retail sales for MCE was in the neighborhood of 5,300 gigawatt hours, and then so here 2030. It's already kind of assumed to grow to 6,300, which represents about a 19% increase just in that 5-year time span. And then when we scale it all the way to 2045, 8,900 or so, almost 9,000, which represent, I think it's about a 70% increase in that kind of that window there. So these are significant load growth assumptions here. And I know Sabrina and the team has been kind of, I think, engaged with the CPUC about these assumptions, but I just think it's important to kind of understand that. That's all I had here. So next slide, please. So it's not just outside factors, the regulatory framework, market conditions that dictate what this portfolio is going to look like. We also need to consider MCE internal planning assumptions as well. And so I think really most notably here, what dictates kind of what the portfolio is going to look like would be this kind of increasing share or increasing renewable percentage of the light green product moving forward. So start, here currently around 60%, escalating to 85% by 2031, and then continuing out into the future. So again, it's just, I don't have a lot on this slide. It's just another kind of thing we have to consider as a part of this portfolio design process here. Next slide, please. Okay, so at this point, we shift from process and kind of get into some of the output. So what I guess working from the left side of this table here, what we're showing is the contracts currently in the portfolio for 2026. And you see kind of as a mix of wind, hydroelectric, solar, and battery. I think the number is about just over 2,000 megawatts under contract in the current year. Then we shift over to this next one. And then, so this is showing the new build capacity kind of throughout the planning horizon. So I guess the planned new contracts in the IRP portfolio. And we're showing about 4,100 megawatts of new build capacity throughout that time span. And you can see here, if you kind of look at the numbers, you see that the big bulk of that comes from solar and battery, and then to a lesser extent, wind. This is generally consistent with the state's modeling as well. And then, I don't shift the right half of the table shifts from megawatt capacity. So, and then we're going to energy. I don't think it's kind of hard to contextualize the energy mix there in column 3, but I just think this column 4 really shows us basically the portfolio mix that's assumed in the IRP portfolio out in 2045. And you can see 51% is assumed to come from solar resources, and then wind and geo also make up a sizable portion of the portfolio as well. Nothing else on this one. Next slide, please. So this one, I think we just, I'd say we just dig a little deeper into what we're showing on the previous slide. So what we're showing here is the plan to kind of new resource acquisition. So the build out of new build resources in MCE's portfolio in the entire planning horizon between 26 and 45. Really, as a part of this, the design, we tried to make this as smooth or as linear over time as possible for planning purposes. But I think actual results may vary, right? I think it might look a little more lumpy due to market realities as you kind of move forward over time. But we think this is just a kind of a good baseline plan to essentially adhere to. One comment I'd like to just, touch on, and I would assume Johnny's going to touch on this later. It's just a concept to introduce is that you see it at the asterisk there, cumulative megawatts or nameplate. So this is nameplate capacity that they're expecting to come under contract. This does not represent what we get in terms of reliability value. So we're showing about 4,500 megawatts of nameplate capacity. However, due to it's called the ELCC factors that are assigned to particularly solar, wind, and battery storage, these resources get cut significantly when it comes to resource adequacy value. So although we're showing about 4,500 megawatts in total there by 2045, I think it ends up being for resource adequacy purposes closer to maybe 1,300 or 1,500 megawatts, just to show you a kind of a sense of the scale that gets cut there. So yeah, that's all I wanted to say on this one. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Johnny.
Thank you, James. Next slide, please. So James has taken us through some of the considerations for this IRP in terms of what the PUC's requirements are, some of the board policy and internal policies as well. And the other factor that is also in consideration here is risk management. And MCE has the energy risk management policy, which this draft PCP currently aligns with. Over that planning horizon between now and 2045, which is about 20 plus years, all planned new contracts are long-term contracts, which would come to your technical committee for approval when the time comes through the open season process. And that the exact timelines of those will be determined by year through this open season process that we do iteratively to try and see what best fits the portfolio at that current time, because the planning horizon over the 20 years cannot foresee everything that can happen in between, including procurement mandates, changes in technology, pricing, demand forecast, and stuff like that. However, for the short-term period, which between 1 and 3 years, which you'll notice also in the draft PCP, most of those contracts have already been contracted for. It's just under development to come. So over the 1 to 3 years, we have to rely on short-term contracts to fill the gap as we continue to build. And MCE plans to continue doing that with the existing resources and what's available in the market over the short-term period after we've gone through that long-term process of trying to fill in as much as we can. Next slide, please. And this slide, you'll also see a similar slide on the open season presentation that kind of shows you what MCE has already done. But what this slide shows is what's already been built or MCE has contracted to be built through long-term contracts, plus the planned portfolio that's within the draft PCP. And one of the highlights is that approximately 92% of MCE's renewable energy will be coming in from long-term contracts by 2045. So far, 46 plus megawatts of new build has been directly in MCE's service area, and most of these are actually operational. About 2,900 of that is statewide that serves MCE, both what's already contracted and what's planned to come online. And the 2911 that you see on the other side is what has been either contracted or planned within the IRP to come online since 2021 alone. Then below it, you can see there's about 2268 megawatts of storage. This is either standalone storage or storage paired with battery resources that is it's either online, is contracted to come online, or has been planned as part of this IRP process to come online within that same horizon. I would also like to highlight here that MCE also offers a feed-in tariff within its service territory to provide direct incentives for new clean energy projects within its service territory to participate in supporting local renewable projects. Next slide, please. And you've probably seen this slide in various other presentations, so I'll be a little bit quick on this. And part of the reasons why we still have short-term contracts as part of the IRP process and in general as part of procurement strategy is one, these load forecast uncertainty. You heard from James earlier that particularly for this past year, the load forecast was at 5,300. That's actually a reduction from what we had seen in the past few years, which was at about 5,600. And so the last two summers, for example, had been rather mild, and so the load was low. Those kinds of changes in forecasts tend to do happen depending on weather or other factors, and it can swing either low or high. Based on that, sometimes short-term contracts are used to either fill in that plug when there's an increase, or also at the same time to offload some of the over procurement in the case where there is over procurement an opportunity to do that. Another reason is usually we've seen a lot of multi-year project development timeline delays due to the various factors that are at play, including the tax incentive issue, the federal policy issue, and then also supply chain constraints that make certain projects to either be delayed or changes within local and statewide processes. There's also the issue of technology diversity. You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket at one go. You kind of want to do this process of going through it iteratively and adding projects as you go and evaluating based on what's best at the time. And so in order to do that, you have to leave some room in between to either fill in the short term or to allow you to be flexible and take advantage of that. And similarly for the price risk management, prices go up, they come down, more so for short-term contracting than long-term. If you're in a long-term contract, you're locked into that price. If you have some room for short-term contracts, you can take advantage of lower price timelines like we are seeing currently in the short-term market. Next slide, please. So as speaking of pricing, what you see here is our attempt to try and show what the cost impacts of the draft PCP would be. This is not, this slide is not directly reflecting what our rate changes would be, as MCE has a rate making process as part of the budget setting that looks at the totality of the circumstances for that particular fiscal year in order to see what rates to either adjust up or down, and that would come through your board for approval. What this is showing is, with all matters held constant and the draft PCP that we have in place, what are the cost impacts that could look like or translate to in terms of rates, which is we felt is the best way to show this. And so as you can see, there's a slight reduction in 2028, and then every year before after that, depending on when the projects are coming online, it has an average of about 5% increase across the board. And yes, certain years are looking a little bit more higher and chunkier than others. This is because as part of the plan, that's when like a larger bulk of the resources are set to come online. However, as we do this every year, the process of iteratively, that's when we would be able to know or ascertain which exactly what timelines those resources would come online. But then overall, this represents about 18 cents per kilowatt hour in cumulative increases from now to 2045, or about 5% annual increase for that matter. And then moving to this set, next place, it's wanted to also highlight a few key differences between the RA framework that we currently are faced with in terms of the compliance and what the IRP's reliability planning is, and there's some of the differences therein. The IRP's planning reliability phase uses what you call the marginal effective load carrying capacity, or ELCCs. Simply put, you can think about this as a reliability factor. And as James has earlier talked about, those are significantly reducing, particularly for some of the resources that are currently highly being dependent upon, like batteries, for example. Right now, if you say, for example, you had a battery of 100 megawatts, you'd be able to count all 100 megawatts for that. Shortly after, within the IRP's planning horizon, that drops from 100% to 22%. So in the future, if you were to get the same reliability from the battery, you have to buy, or you'd have to procure 5 times as much for that. And that's the same theme you're seeing across all the other different resources. However, on the RA compliance framework, it also doesn't look at it that way particularly, but it takes a deeper dive, and it's instead of being a stack on an annual basis like the reliability plan is, it looks at the slice of day, or the 24-hour slice within the peak day of a month for every month of the year. And that's where you're able to show your RA filing, or rather your RA portfolio in that phase for every hour within that time, and adjust based off of that. How the reliability scores for those resources, they are released on an annual basis as part of the filing that we tend to do on the year ahead filing, which is the planning is usually kind of short term. So there's a year ahead filing, and then there's a monthly ahead where you get to refine and go further down on the monthly process. However, on the IRP side of things, it's a long-term compliance that looks at 10 to 20 years horizon time frame, and it's iteratively every 2 years you get to iteratively go through this process again. But for the RA process, which is for compliance, it's an annual process that you do every year. How the objectives for that, the two is that for the IRP's perspective, the objective there is to meet the state's GHG reductions in goals, and to also meet the reliability portfolio based on the state's planning portfolio. For the RA side, it's for you to meet the capacity requirements that are assigned to you as a load-serving entity, plus the planning reserve margin, or rather the PRM, which is usually about 18% thereabout of MCE's load on top of what the requirements are. And so the key takeaway here is that MCE is left to optimize its PCP in a manner that would meet the IRP's requirements, while at the same time also optimize and meet what the slice of day RA compliance requirements are at the same time. And that's the balance that we have to strike in here. Next slide, please. And so as we continue in the resource adequacy talk, there's the clear reliability within the IRP itself. And the first part is the fossil fuel question. Well, MCE does not directly procure natural gas, we do expect natural gas to still continue being part of the resource adequacy stack that MCE will be relying upon. And this is due to a multitude of factors, including availability within the market, the sheer amount of resource adequacy that we have to procure as a result of the reducing ELCCs. At the same time, also the increasing requirements based on the load forecast and the capacity forecast that is also assigned as well. So we do expect that natural gas will continue being there. However, so far there's a lot of progress that has been made with over 860 of nameplate fleet capacity that is also expected to come online over the next 6 years, plus more that is already planned within the IRP to continue catching up to this. And as a result, so as I said, MCE will have its natural gas in its portfolio all the way through 2045. And that load, given that the load is also expected to increase, the other concept here is that while that load is increasing and we are meeting the increase of the load with new resources, we're not expecting to continue increasing our reliance on natural gas. So as a percentage, that number is going to be reducing. Like for example, within the draft PCP, we are going from about 74 to 45% reliance on natural gas in that sentence. Next slide, please. And so what you see here is the draft alternate PCP, and this is a different conforming portfolio that is addressing the issue of critical reliability, and it's a little bit more aggressive on addressing and reducing the natural gas reliance for the RA. And in this PCP, for example, we are going still from the same 74% in RA natural gas reliance all the way down to 25% by 2045. So it further reduces by 20% in comparison to the draft PCP. Next slide, please. And similarly, this slide shows the same concept of cost projections based on how I described earlier. And now in this case, it's going from where we currently are, or the assumptions that we currently are, and it's increasing by a cumulative of about 24 cents per kilowatt hours compared to the 18 cents per kilowatt hour in the draft PCP. And then on average, the increase is at 6.5% as opposed to the 5% annually on the initial draft PCP. So representing a total of 194% increase by 2045 as compared to 150% increase in the initial draft PCP. Next slide, please. And this slide kind of just puts the two together on the in comparison to see where the draft PCP's cumulative rate impacts are as compared to the alternate PCP, which is about 18 cents to the kilowatt hour to 24 cents to the kilowatt hour in cumulative increase over the planning horizon. And lastly, this slide shows the comparison between the draft PCP and the alternate PCP in terms of absolute numbers of the resource types that are being shown in both. So like battery storage for the draft PCP is about 2,100, and in the alternate PCP, it increases to about 2,400, an increase of 280. Similarly, geothermal increases by about 300 from 96 to 395. There's a slight reduction in solar from 1,500 to 1,400, about 100 increase in wind, and then in total, you have to add an additional of 580 thereabout megawatts of nameplate capacity from the draft PCP to the alternate PCP. Now, accordingly, though, given the various factors that James had earlier highlighted on the realities within the market, staff is currently leaning on the draft PCP, given the various factors that are being considered, these costs as well, and other factors that had already been talked about by James. But then looking ahead, MCE plans to continue investing in clean RA resources while balancing across the various guiding principles that Sabrina had initially highlighted, and to continue discussions on its clean RA efforts. And I'll pass it back to Sabrina.
Yeah, next slide, please. Sorry. Yeah, so that's, I mean, essentially it. We've presented, the draft preferred conforming portfolio that staff is currently leaning towards based on, our expectations of resource availability, as well as, the alternate conforming portfolio that is, we are putting together responsive to the public and the board's considerations on investing more in clean RA. And really, just looking for feedback from the technical committee that can help staff finalize our IRP before we bring it to the full board for approval at the July board meeting. And with that, open it up to any questions that you all have.
Okay, thank you to staff for the report. And I guess we'll start with questions from San Rafael.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. There's a lot of material in this IRP. I guess most of my questions are centered around the assumptions that are being used to build out the numbers that are in the IRP. And this may be a little simplistic, but when I think about it, there are a few levers that we can pull in terms of the renewable content versus cost. And so one of those is the breakout between the long-term contracts and the short-term contracts. And I understand that we cannot get rid of, we're not going to go to 100% long-term contracts, at least not in the near term. So I'd like to just better understand, like, what is our current breakout between long-term and short-term contracts? I think it's like 40% of load, but I don't actually know. But let's just say it's 40%. And it seems like we're going to 92% in 2045, according to the presentation. But it would be helpful because some of these contracts are going to roll off and then we're going to be signing new contracts. And so it would be helpful for me or the board just to see, like, what is the toggle, what's going on with, the breakout between the long-term and the short-term contracts.
Thanks, Director. I don't have, Johnny or others might be able to answer the exact breakdown. I think, we can definitely provide that breakdown. And I just will flag, I think you're correct. Like, as it stands in the IRP now, as James mentioned, we add all of our existing contracts, but then everything that we add in the IRP is assumed to be a new, clean, renewable, long-term PPA.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also to put it into a little bit more context is that currently within the IRP's PCP, the only short-term contracts, at least on the energy side, that are there are the contracts that are currently in place. And usually, as you are aware, they are not more than 3 years in length. So by 2029 onwards, right, as of right now, within the PCP, there are no short-term contracts except for the allocations that we expect from the hydro and nuclear allocations, and then, of course, for the RA side.
Okay. And I think so that's one lever, I think, is just the percentage of long-term versus short-term. And then the other lever is that the table of the renewable energy targets, where it's like light green, 60% going to, I can't remember, 85 or 90% in 2045. I mean, is that something that the board should be discussing? Because that feels like a pretty significant driver of the costs underlying the portfolio. And I think, in prior TechCom conversations and also with the board, I thought we were trying to get some flexibility around, that it wasn't a hard target for 60%, that, we were trying to get some flexibility around that. So I don't know if that matters in the build out of this IRP. Like, can we implement flexibility later after we submit this to the CPUC? But that seems to me like an area where I would like more discussion as a board member around what our renewable energy targets are.
Yeah, certainly. I think As part of the state's requirement, it's 60% by 2030 and onwards. And so certainly that's the floor from which we get to operate with. But beyond that, as you've seen for the light green escalation into 85% by 2031 and beyond, should the board want to make adjustments to that, the board is more than welcome to, because that's an internal target that the board then gets to decide how they want the numbers to be.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's exactly right. And in context of, the IRP, so we have this like time constraint of having to submit something to the PUC by August 10th. So what we've done is incorporate all the board adopted policies as they are now. But absolutely, you're right that the board at any time internally can change those targets if they wish, and it wouldn't get reflected in the IRP until the next planning cycle, but any, board adopted policy would supersede those policies that we included in the IRP in terms of our actual procurement, for sure.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then on the resource advocacy part of it, I mean, I appreciate the last part of Johnny's presentation where we're currently 74% natural gas going to, I think it was 45%, if I heard you correctly, under the preferred conforming portfolio. And then under the alternative, it was going from 74% to 25%.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. I guess, my question is, I've heard that resource adequacy in today's market, like the pricing on that has come down significantly. And again, I don't track the pricing, historic pricing on this, but is this a good time? Again, another board, another discussion for the board is, are these the right targets for RA? We want to achieve clean RA, increase, again, decrease our natural gas, in our portfolio. If the pricing right now is favorable, is this a good time to be purchasing more? Is the question.
I'd say inherently, and see if we can jump in a bit more here. Inherently, the natural gas, or rather the RA market, is a short-term market. And so I'm not aware that we have the ability to do 20-year or 10-year short-term contracting on the RA front per se. But what we are doing in terms of replacing the natural gas is that we're replacing that with long-term contracts. So when we do replace that, the replacement is being taken out on 10-year basis or 15-year basis, or however long the PPA that we sign is. The other factor here that's happening, particularly with this IRP, there's two things to consider. Is that one, this is looking at it from a marginal ELCC standpoint, which is first looking at it on an annual stack. And assigning a reliability factor to the specific resources. However, when it comes to how the RA compliance actually works, it's through the slice of day framework, which is one, on a year by year basis, and then two, it goes further down where you're looking at 24-hour profile slice of day for the peak day of that month for every month within that year. And so these optimizations that happen around that to try and fit what your RA portfolio looks like for every month, on the month, and for the year particularly. And so that is also short-term in nature. And so truly, if prices are low on the long-term contracts, or if you see better prices on the long-term contracts, we'll be able to accelerate faster the reduction of that. But then if it's in the short-term market, I'm not aware that we can do that on a longer horizon time frame. You have something to add, Sibi?
Yeah, thank you so much, Johnny. Director Andre, I just wanted to circle back to your question before, because I think we have an answer for you, which is right now, roughly half of our calendar year energy supply is coming from long-term contracts. And that is based on what we already have under contract. That will naturally go up to around 75% by 2029. And as part of that, to Johnny's point, we will naturally displace some of our needs for short-term gas-fired RA with that clean capacity that we're getting under our long-term PPAs. So that's kind of just we can provide definitely more detail to you, but I just wanted to give you that big picture, the path we're on right now towards 2029.
Okay, so then how do we, so if half the load is under long-term contracts and we get RA with that. But how is it that then we're 74% gas? Is that the, I guess, how is the math working on that?
Because this goes, I'll let Sabrina or Johnny, this goes back to the point that they were making earlier about nameplate versus net qualifying capacity.
Okay.
The clean resources that we are procuring under long-term contracts, unfortunately, don't yield a one-for-one
I see.
net qualifying capacity. So there's sort of a degradation that happens there in the accounting.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think circling back a little bit here too,
I see.
to your it's like energy versus capacity. So I think it's important to note that in the preferred conforming PCP that we put forth, Johnny's saying 40% of our capacity, our RA stack would be natural gas still, but we're still importantly, like we're still meeting in both scenarios, right? Our emissions targets. So those emissions targets haven't changed between those two. So what that kind of indicates is, right, that the natural gas is really only being relied on, or what's really being relied on for capacity, not energy. So it's really only coming online in those hours where it needs to produce reliability benefits. So it's not being used all the time. That's why we're all, as a state, able to still meet our emissions targets, if that helps a little bit there. And then I think to the question of, using applying clean RA targets, I think it's a great question. Would love to have more board discussion on this. But to Johnny's point, what we're seeing is a reduction in natural gas prices for RA. So if we're looking at adopting clean RA policies, we would be looking at going after products like geothermal because they have a high RA value. But those products, as our procurement team can tell you, we really want those products. They have a really high net qualifying capacity ELCC RA value, but they're also really expensive and really scarce. And so that's what's driving really those cost differences between those two portfolios is one, we have to procure a lot more geothermal to get to that same reliability benefit, but that resource is coming at a higher cost. So we can't really take advantage of those lower RA prices and still get to the cleaner portfolio because they're not for the same resources.
Okay, that's helpful. And then my last question is on the short-term contracts, when we're buying like energy off the grid because we don't have enough to cover our full load under long-term contracts. Like, is that unspecified energy that we are buying off the grid? Is that, or sometimes it's specified, but there's also instances where we're buying unspecified energy?
Hi, Director Andre. The short-term contracts are for physical clean power that's delivered to the CAISO. So it is physical energy delivered to the grid that we take title to both the energy and the underlying environmental attributes. Is that your question? So it's not unspecified. It is specified clean power delivered to the grid to serve our load.
Okay, so it is specified. So we when we buy energy off the grid, then it is specified power.
So
Specified
are you
clean.
talking about our short-term renewable contracts, or are you talking about our load? To the extent we schedule our load into the CAISO, so to the extent we don't have clean energy under contract in a particular hour, for example, to meet our load, that is just grid power and very likely natural gas-fired power because it's not under contract to an LSE. But to the extent we do have clean energy under contract that is being delivered at that moment to the grid, that is serving our load. So, I don't know if that answers your question. This is something we're going to go into more detail in the workshops, by the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would be helpful just to better understand that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you from Senator Fail. Going to switch back over to Concord. Richard McCormick.
Great. Thank you. Terrific. Great questions, actually, from Senator Fell as well. I had some of them, so I'll just skip those. Just a couple of things, and one comment is, you say I will admit that the growth rate that we're being assigned, that CPUC is doing seems, all I want to say is I want to encourage you guys to continue to push back. I know as cities, we sometimes are given targets, and we look at the underlying assumptions, and they're just, they're talking about population growth in California of like 20% over the next 10 or 20. I mean, it makes no sense. I understand that we're going to have more more electrification, but that growth curve seemed just remarkable. I mean, very optimistic or something or whatever. So I would just encourage us to continue to push back, because that's obviously one of the better ways we can kind of help our overall portfolio, is to just not have the targets be quite so high.
Yeah, 100% agree. We are actively, most of the CCAs, us in particular, are active in conversation with the CEC. A lot of these load forecast assumptions are coming from the CEC, then they flow through to the PUC. So we're actively working at both the CEC and the CPUC to advocate for realistic assumptions.
Yeah.
And really, I think there are aggressive load forecast growth assumptions coming from data center projected load throughout the state. One of the things that we at MCE have been strongly advocating for, and we will continue to advocate for, is that the LSEs that are expected to actually see that load growth should be assigned the reliability cost to serve those customers. If MCE, for instance, isn't expected to have those data centers in our service area, it seems counterintuitive that MCE customers would be required to subsidize the reliability costs of, customers in the East Bay or, other places. South
Right.
Bay, so we're continuing to advocate for that, but certainly it's a challenge that the state is facing, figuring out how to do its long-term planning for what could be really, really rapid load growth, not knowing exactly where it's going to show up, and then us, on the other hand, trying to advocate to ensure that we aren't expected to take on the cost of procuring resources for load that we may not serve, or may frankly not come on at all, and leave a bunch of stranded costs. So rest assured, we are advocating there.
Great. Thank you. She on it. A second question, or next question was, so the percentage, you looked at the percentage kind of, or you demonstrated the percentage requirements of each energy types that we were assigned. I'm just kind of curious, are those same ratios being assigned to all CCAs and PG&E and all the different, entities in California? We don't get something different, because I don't see nuclear, for example, on ours, but obviously PG&E would have that. So how does?
Oh, no. So the actual resource types are not necessarily assigned.
Okay, those just are.
Yeah. So there's a
extraction.
combination of kind of just understand, like, I guess, using best judgment, and then following what's the CPUC has a broad system model, and then kind of applying some of those realities to kind of like MCE's pro rata share, not necessarily 1-to-1, but using that as kind of the overall guide for what they see as like market realities moving past 2030 and so on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, okay. Great. Thank you. Second or next, you talk about the long-term contracts. And I think we're all interested in having more long-term and not short-term. But there was a notion. This is going on to Director Andres' comment as well about we'll only do long-term contracts going forward. I think it's because I just don't know if that's actually. I mean, I don't know if
it's an assumption that I think
Right.
James and Johnny, for IRP purposes, it's a long-term
Okay.
planning exercise. So what we assume in the IRP is that everything added is a long-term PPA.
Okay, because I would imagine I understand we have to short-term, I guess, in the short term, but you look at some of the advantages that short-term give us, and those are going to be valid, right? So we need the flexibility to do both, right? So, all right. The next one, so I guess you answered one of my questions was, this kind of this RA factor that solar gets discounted. So is geothermal the only like renewable? Like what's the perfect like for high renewable and high RA factor? Like what are our options? It seems like we're really kind of between a rock and a hard place here.
Geothermal.
Geothermal's it, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, and people have the state and MCE, we would love to see things like offshore wind. They would have a little bit higher, not as high as geo, but it would be higher than, in-state wind, out-of-state wind. But currently, offshore wind is really just an idea that we all are hoping for.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
just to follow up on that. So geothermal all the way through the planning horizon, they give you 90%, which is, I mean, that's pretty great, right?
Great.
Interestingly, they break out wind by different kind of like regions. I think the lowest is all the way down to like maybe 14%. And then at New Mexico wind, I believe, is the highest at somewhere around 36, which by comparison to some of these other, like 36 is actually pretty good. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of add that.
And what's our wind? Do we know on the top of our head? Like what's the ultimate pass wind? Is it good? I don't want to.
It varies. It's somewhere in the 20%, and then it shifts back and forth.
Northern California wind is better than Southern California wind. I'll say that.
Okay, great.
But yeah,
Well, what is happening? Okay, just a couple others, then I can. So, the their pricing charts, is that nominal or inflation adjusted pricing? Because it looked pretty scary, but if it's nominal, it's, it is discounted a little bit.
Yeah, it is nominal as of now, and that was just meant to show what that might look like. So as we go from year to year, and we adjust for that, of course, there's going to be inflationary as part of that as well, and so its actual effect is going to be somewhere a little bit lesser than that, or it could be more if prices go higher, because also in terms of like the way we are pricing, we are projecting the prices is based on what we currently know to be the prices, and we are applying an incremental factor to that. However, as we continue with this, we are not the only LSC that are going after these resources, so suddenly there is a scenario, actually multiple scenarios where the cost of these resources actually go up way more significantly than we are already projecting within the cost model itself.
Right. And geothermal is a good example, right? We are all chasing that same scarce, perfect storm.
And then at the
Sure.
same time, if enhanced geothermal takes off, maybe the cost will come down. I think it's important to recognize.
Yeah, I guess I would just-
the
I would-
20-year planning horizon makes it hard. But
Right.
at one point, I just wanted to, if I'm sure we already hammered it, but on the rate impact, I know it looks scary, but that's assuming we were to directly pass through those procurement costs immediately, which is not how MCE rate making works. We don't have a mechanism to directly pass through procurement costs. That's all. Whenever we set rates, it would have to go through the board. We don't generally change rates every year, and it would be dependent on all the other factors. That's just really showing the
relative.
Exactly.
I think it's more, because I agree. And of course, and the generation part of a bill is only it's unfortunately, a small factor of the entire customer's bill. So not the whole customer's bill will go up 150% or whatever over 20 years, but just our piece of it. All right. And then finally, because I think I understand what you're getting at, where you're trying to do these. We have this kind of a bit of a decision to make about like our reliance on natural gas to kind of help offset some of our RA costs, and that will make it lower for the customer, which is great, or at least is a good board discussion. But I will say in the deck, you never actually say the alternate. You never give the you never actually say the alternate scenario. You spoke to it, but you didn't say it. You just kind of put a alternate there. So I would say in a deck that is going to go out to the board and has to be kind of consumed, you need to say, this is our proposed, and this is the alternate. Here's the scenario for the proposed, which is whatever, some percentage of natural gas. And then here's you have to actually, I think, just kind of quantify it to say, this is the draft, this is the alternate, so we can make the decision whether we want to trade off renewability, whatever, versus rate cost or whatever. So. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Director McCormick. Any other questions here in Centerville? Director Murphy?
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Also wanted to go into a little bit more about the affordability aspect. I appreciate staff's perspective in terms of it as a guiding principle. What I'm challenged by, I'm sure you all are as well, is just this August deadline. I'm thinking a lot about like how might we evaluate the impacts of kind of the current portfolios on our residents and our small businesses. What is the process for doing that? How are you all monitoring the evaluation piece there?
So as of right now, the rate scenario that was shown, that was looking at it based on an example of a residential frame side of things. However, usually when we go out and do our procurement through the open season, and then we get the contracts and bring back, usually part of the things we look at is it net present value, is it has a positive rate of return, and usually if that is the case, then it's a net benefit to MCE than it is a bigger cost. And to that extent, when it goes into or flows into the pro forma and into the budget, then it doesn't make a negative effect to further exacerbate the cost. Now, of course, there's the inflationary costs that are always going to be the case, and prices will increase, but that's how we generally look at how when we add in more resources, particularly on the long term, that's how we put it together to make sure that it does not have significant adverse effects on rates, particularly.
And then what type of off-ramps or reassessment triggers are provided here? Like if there's worse conditions?
So it's iterative, right? So I think the biggest off ramp is that we are not required to build this plan, right? This is a compliance requirement that guides our future open seasons for that like 2-year period in between the approved IRP and the next IRP. So it's very iterative. So there are, numerous opportunities, as we referenced in response to Director Andre, if the board takes action in between when an IRP is approved and the next one, that board policy would become precedent, because this is a requirement for the PUC, guides our planning. It's very important. But if the board decides to, deviate from this, that's totally within your right.
Okay, and then Sabrina, you mentioned, I don't know, it is. Sabrina, you mentioned a little bit about the AI and data center growth and some of those impacts. The current portfolio that we have, how is that how is that kind of, how are those impacts reflected or evaluated given this new portfolio?
So
draft
honestly,
portfolio?
I don't know that it's necessarily taken in entirely. I think we have, as James mentioned, we are assigned those load targets for the IRP purpose. We can't change them at this point for this IRP. So we have to meet that load regardless. And so we build the portfolio to serve that amount of load, not thinking, there's no way to say, we would prefer to take out, a 10% because we don't think that we're going to get that data center load or something. So we can't really factor it in that way. But when we're all thinking internally about other things, like when we submit our RA forecasts to the CEC through the IPER process, something a lot of folks next to me work on, if they show us that we're being assigned more load than we think, we say, where are you getting those assumptions from? There was actually a case last year where we were being told maybe we're going to get some data center load, and we had to go through this process with the CEC to kind of figure out how to adjust our obligation. So we can do it kind of in the interim and through the other filings, but in the IRP, once we get to the point of creating our plan, we can't adjust the load. We could, of course, say, if MCE were expecting to get a large quantity of data center load in our service territory, we would factor that into our IRP. We would say, this is how we plan to serve, maybe this is how we plan to serve those customers. That would be, maybe a future board conversation. And we would factor it in that way. But because currently we aren't aware of any data centers that we will be serving, we haven't factored that in explicitly into our plan.
Okay. And then just a last question, because this is in my head a few times that I've gone through this process. And so I'm just wondering, where does staff provide the checkpoints around the assumptions versus the actual plan throughout the year? I know we have this every 2 years, but I'm trying to figure out when was the last time I received an update or report about kind of like the checkpoints that are given here.
It's a good question. I think, back when we did the 2022 IRP cycle, we had the operational IRP that you probably remember, Director Murphy, that we were doing annually. We don't do that process anymore. I think, so, if the board would like check-ins, we could add check-ins for sure. The last time I think you would have heard this is, I believe, when Vidya and I have presented this IRP, we've gone a few times before the board in the last year. I think we've included check-ins on here was in our 2022 IRP, and here's what we have now. I think the last time I presented this to TechCom, we had that, which March, April. I'm not sure what month that was. February, yeah. But if the board wants more regular check-ins, we're happy to provide those.
Yeah, I think maybe staff can consider what that would be. That would be ideal, and just being a bit more intentional about calling that out.
Sure.
Given the questions I think that board members have had and members of the public, I think it's valuable to bring some of those periodic checkpoints. Annually is great.
Yeah.
Quarterly is probably extra, but also valuable. But I think just ensuring that that's a part of this process and clarifying that to the board would be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely can do.
Thank you.
I was going to add additional comment about the data center load growth. It might be a good opportunity. We haven't really talked a lot about the narrative template piece of this, but it's a long document that you submit as a part of this. It might be worthwhile for MCE to include at least a section saying, hey, we understand that this is the assumptions and we can't get around it. But internally, we have this very different assumption about data center load growth, and maybe we would address it. Just an opportunity to expand more on that. It's just an idea. Yeah.
I think that will definitely be in our narrative.
So I had a question for Director Murphy. Are you asking for like a consent calendar item that would just give us an update, or would it be an actual?
I think this is where, we have this is just, I guess, we're guiding principle. Like if we're thinking about, So let me take a step back. There have been more questions, I think, that the board has had around our procurement strategy. This is a huge piece of our procurement strategy. Because of it, I think that staff has done, from my perspective, different checkpoints, but it hasn't been named as the checkpoint that we're doing, that we're identifying the measurable impacts of our IRP. And so that can come in the form of a consent calendar item. It might also be a CEO report update, right? I mean, it can come in any form. I think what I'm asking for staff to do is be very intentional about saying, hey, board, you all approved this IRP. Here are the checkpoints periodically. And again, I was kind of pushing quarterly. I don't think that's realistic, right? But annually, I think we just need to say, this is what this is. This is the update. And then that way, any questions that are being asked is asked during that time instead of, oh, that was supposed to be the update and we didn't know, or it was kind of included in something else. So whatever that comes in, whether it's on a consent calendar or a new business item or a CEO report, just being very intentional about claiming that as a periodic report.
Yeah, sure. I think we can work that into the staff report and recommendation when we take it to the board in July.
Thank you, Director Sor.
Thank you. How much time do we have? This is my first tech comment. I don't want to talk too much.
32 seconds.
Okay, I want to go over.
You're halfway done.
Can you bring up the PowerPoint presentation really quickly? And then while we're doing that, so I was clicking through while you were talking, and it's my understanding, oh yeah, who would share? Oh, perfect. That we're supposed to be doing these IRPs every 2 years, but the one that was attached was 2022, and I saw that it was delayed by the agency, not by us. So is this August 10th deadline a previous submittal, or is it basically just skipped the last 2-year cycle?
I guess it depends on how you look at it. They technically delayed the 2024 cycle submission to 2026. Yes, because
Okay, so
yeah.
we're not behind. We don't have to do like another one.
No.
There's nothing. Okay, great. Okay, so can you go to slide 9? Because I just had a couple of chart questions. So I wanted to clarify because, and apologies, I'm projecting issues that we have at my city council on you all. So this may not actually be an issue. But what I sometimes find is that staff provides reports, but then doesn't ask the question very specifically about what kind of feedback we want. So it looks like the ask to us today is just to, in general, approve this IRP, right? It's just in general, just provide guidance.
I think we're looking for feedback on, we presented 2 different portfolios. Just does the technical committee want to steer us in a particular direction? Is the kind of feedback to help us finalize, I think.
Sure.
We're trying to keep the options open for you all to provide as much guidance as you feel.
Can you show us the 2 different portfolios? Because I think to his point, I saw the word PCP and I saw the word alternative PCD, but then I didn't see them together enough to be able to provide really helpful feedback.
Yes, if you turn to slide 22, that's the best place on this deck.
And when we were on this slide, I was looking through the attachments to see if there was any backup. These are just numbers on a PowerPoint slide with no associated report or attachment, right?
No, these are also in the staff report.
It's the data is in the staff report. Okay, so what you're asking us is whether or not we agree with what?
If you have a preference towards, we have the requirement for the IRP is to submit 1 portfolio to the PUC. That is kind of our overarching plan. We have 2 that we think are, reasonable based on board policies, discussions we've heard from the board. I think our preference is to go with the draft PCP because it most closely represents what our procurement team believes is available and affordable in the market. That said, we also know that the board and the public are very interested in reducing MCE's reliance on natural gas for RA purposes. So we created this alternative portfolio that has a larger percent of clean RA. It takes us from, 45%, 40 to 25. So there's a greater percent of clean RA. That means that we have to procure essentially more geothermal to get there, which costs more money.
Right.
And so does the technical committee have any feedback on which direction to go?
Right. So the question really is, do we care enough about the natural gas problem that we want you to try to put on a report that we will get more geothermal than we think we can actually get? Is that the question?
I mean, not that we think.
That's one
Yeah,
of the
not that
questions.
it's not, yeah,
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the cost of going to.
It's that other,
Okay.
that other form that has the two.
Microphone, guys.
I'm sorry, not to jump in, but I think
No, no,
that's
please.
where I was trying, like, that it's in those multiple slides. You've got to pull them together. There's
Yeah.
the slide that has the cost difference to the ratepayer. And I think that's the trade-off. And
Yeah.
that's what
Can
I'm
you
trying to
go to
get
that
to.
slide, whichever
That is
slide
the
that
key
one's
trade-off you're
cleaner
being
thing?
asked for, right? It's
There,
like
this one.
this
Yeah.
guy versus the cleaner, the reliance on natural gas for RA.
Thank you, Director McCormick. So back
Yeah.
to Director Zorn, just so we can keep some.
No. That's exactly what these are the questions because he did the same thing that I did. I have like slide 9, slide 10, slide 18. And like, as you were talking, asking a couple of these questions, and I just wanted to make sure that we're providing you the actual answer that you need because it's really guidance rather than we're, approving
absolutely.
very specific numbers. So, so for the purposes of the natural gas in RA, does that affect our, power label in any particular way?
No, it does not.
Okay. And so I'm hearing people say that we support this idea of we're not interested in seeing us give guidance for the increased rates, right? That's what I'm hearing other people say. Is that fair? Oh, maybe not. I don't know. Okay, so so the argument is being made the draft PCP in general will impact rates, maybe not one-to-one, on that exact day, but theoretically it will overall be less of an impact to rates than the alternative with geothermal included.
That's correct. And I think if you, to summarize it more succinctly or directly, I think for you, right? I think staff's recommendation is generally to move forward with the draft PCP because we think that's more realistic, affordable right now, and because we have time to iterate. We very much, I think everybody probably here wants to invest more in clean RA. We'd like to see California moving away from natural gas aggressively. But I think we also want a plan that most closely reflects what we believe is reality. And so that would be our recommendation. That said, right, the plan is a 20-year planning horizon. It is iterative. And so if the board were to direct us to move towards the clean RA portfolio, like things, will change between now and then. So we just want to be responsive to the board and the public's feedback about that. We could create another alternative.
All right, 2 more questions. Can you go back to slide 10, please? Yes. Okay. So this is board policy. This is not required by the state. So I just want to reiterate to all of us that this is what we would like to see. But if staff identify that any of these actually result in a rate challenge or a procurement challenge, then communicating that to the board or to the technical committee is very valuable. Because how much of this is we talked about this, I think, at one of the retreats or something. Like these percentages are our board recommendation. It's significantly higher than what's actually required, right? So, okay. And I would love to have that kind of reminder each time you're getting input from us, what's required versus what we're recommending. And so that way, if we say we would like to have cleaner RA, yes, we're all in agreement on that, but what's required versus where would we like to be? And that way we know where we can settle on a lower number that maybe impacts better. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, was there just?
Well, no, my only other comment was regarding the word nameplate. I, in general, understood what you were talking about, but I'm equating this to all of us having to deal with our housing elements, and you identify all these places where you can build, but in actuality, a lot of these places are not going to get built out. So is the nameplate number, does it negatively impact us at some point in the future? If we report the nameplate and then all of a sudden it goes from 80, what was it, 85 down to like 16? You said some huge number difference. How does that impact us in the long term?
So the nameplate stays the same. So 100 megawatts of nameplate now and 100 megawatts of nameplate in 2045 would still be the same. What changes is that reliability factor, the marginal effective load carrying capacity that's being assigned to it, essentially saying that they think that, for example, for the battery situation, they think right now for the battery, it can provide up to 100% of reliability, but then in the future, they only think that it will only have incremental of 22%. So meaning you'd need 5 batteries of the same size to kind of meet the same reliability as one battery would right now.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's helpful. I'm trying to think of helpful context. So it's not that the nameplate changes, right? A battery let's go geothermal. A geothermal plant that can produce 100 megawatts, it can always produce 100 megawatts. a battery that is a 5 megawatt battery, it's always a 5 megawatt battery. So when we say it reduces from 100 to 15, we don't mean that the battery's functionality changes. It means that the value to the grid at the point in time we're considering it is less. So like over time, a battery becomes less valuable if there's nothing to charge it or the, things like that. So that's what we're talking about
But
there.
what I'm hearing
Yeah.
is we estimate today 1, and then
It
in 10
changes.
years, it's actually going to be 5. And we didn't account for that in long-term like cost projections. I don't know if that's true. I'm just saying
Oh, no,
that's what
yeah,
I'm hearing.
fair. So when we say we've accounted for a name, like we're saying we have to procure more nameplate to meet.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh,
Now I'm done.
Okay. Chair, may I add something?
Sure.
But unless you want to kind of go there. So on the last comment, I just want to say that it's actually worse than what the answer. It's what. So in our, we comply every year in our procurement based on the latest compliance rules. About a decade ago, when we went and did a PPA for a solar power plant that said it said nameplate 100 megawatts, we could count on actual capacity when the sun was shining, let's say around 30 megawatts. And we did a 20-year contract for that. The next year, PUC changes it to 15 in the value of capacity. We did all of our calculations, the board approval to go into that long-term PPA based on a value of 30 when we buy 100. And it goes to 15 in no time. And then it continues to drop. So we need to buy more just to replace. We're not advancing. We're just trying to catch up from the change in rule. In addition to what Sabrina said, we have like physical degradation in batteries also, and it's in the contract percentages and what have you. But when the regulator changes the implied value of a long-term contract, well, our ratepayers are paying for it, and you have financial impact. So, but long story short, I just want to recognize Director Andre and all the directors over here. This is really good. Please show up at our workshop to talk about Index Plus and hedge transactions, because all these items are actually are twined that are all connected to each other. And like Director McCormick mentioned, we can change that. There was an 85% number, which you went to Director Zone about like our goals versus the state goals, right? We can accelerate that. We can make it 95% in 5 years, right? But then when Sabrina says, compared to an RA contract that we do not contract for the energy from that gas-fired power plant, compared to geothermal RA value, it's almost 15x. We're just saying it's when, all due respect, Sabrina, when you say it's more expensive, instead of $5, $6. No, it's $150.
Which
Right. So that's where the financial and rate dynamics come in when we're talking about how fast do we want to get to our vision and mission. And it's not a step function. So anyway, please show up to the workshop. I think that would be great, great discussion and dynamics. Thank you.
Yes, and I agree with our CEO with the comments. I think they were all good questions. If we can go back to the slide that showed the comparison, I think what and while we're pulling the slide up, this is the one that showed the alternative versus draft. I thank you. The previous one, I apologize. The one that was just up before that had the table, I guess. But they both illustrate the same thing. Well,
22.
Let me
22.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having the actual that one there. So I think what I'm hearing is that we have choices as a board, and this is the larger board question, because what's being asked here today is just for us to give feedbacks so that they can do a better package for the full board when it's presented. But we could switch as our CEO just said to all clean, to all geothermal for everything, but the cost is extreme, and then who pays that cost, right? So we could tell people that we've got this, and then the ratepayers are paying 5 times or more what PG&E rates are, which we need to keep our ratepayers, right? So that's, I think, the challenge for us as we go forward. The draft, I think, shows, as we look at the cost, it does increase over the 20-year period, but we're looking at, just a couple of years here. But if we go to the other one, it would be extreme today. They may find solutions for it in the future that bring costs down, but today, just making that switch, I think, is extreme. It's an extreme cost increase, is what I will say. Not that it's an extreme decision. I think that's what we're being asked sort of to talk about today. We were doing initially questions, but I think we had comments mixed in. So I think we all had our I think we all had our time to say that. But I'm going to move to public comment on this if we can, and see if there's any members from the public in San Rafael, and then we'll do Concord, and then we'll do internet. So let's start with San Rafael.
No members of the public here in San Rafael.
Okay, thank you. And then over here in Concord, no one. Okay, what about online?
None online.
Okay. All right, thank you. So if there's with the other comments there, I think, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Director Murphy, sorry.
I just had questions that time. I do have some comments, and
Sure.
and really one of the comments I just wanted to make was because I think the affordability is obviously a huge guiding principle. I know that we're talking about the board vision and policy. I think we see that as board members probably the most flexible piece that we have, given that we have been very considerate of new changes. But I do, I think one of the pieces that is missing, perhaps because it's not a center part of this process, but I think it's something that the board should be considering. And then I think it would be helpful for staff to give us is really the visibility of the local economic development of the projects. It lists here like the 46 megawatts of renewables. I think this is where, buy-in really happens, right? Of course, like if folks see high rates, that usually would indicate, maybe not a good thing. But if there's high rates and local development or connections to local labor unions and things like that, I think there's value placed in that higher rate, right? Oftentimes. And so I think just if staff can give us a little bit more direction, maybe it's through the procurement workshops with it, which I think would be a great avenue to kind of explore some of these topics, or even through this process about the more visibility of like how the local economic development impacts are moving based on these two portfolios or even one of the portfolios. I think there'd be some value that we're not just meeting statewide standards, but we're also still pushing the vision forward of having these projects locally in our service areas. I think we know that. I think we've seen that, right? But how do we monitor that? How do we track that? And what's that look like in the next draft?
I just want to say, I don't know if Jared is online or available, but we do have reports that capture that type of information, and we can add that to our documents to say what are the local impacts, how the FIT projects or the FIT Plus projects have done, like creation of jobs and local impacts. We can provide that as well.
And we've got that in past reports, meaning we're reflecting on that. But I think we need to figure out
moving.
Yeah, what does it look like to vision that out, right? Especially because these are metrics that we're looking to for the future. But we have, like I said, we have great reports that have reflected on that from our past 15 years, of course, which I truly do appreciate. And then generally, I was just going to say, I think like this also helps us be a little bit more realistic about those procurement strategies and constraints as well, because I think that we're looking to our ratepayers first and foremost as the critical piece of buy-in. And I think ratepayers are influenced obviously by their pockets, right? And what they can afford, but they're also influenced by what they see around their community. One of the directors mentioned about housing, right? Folks like to see housing, certain parts of their areas, probably not other parts, but generally housing provides development in a community. And I think in that same way, when we see projects right here in our service areas being done, it helps ratepayers understand what they're actually paying for in that generation rate, right? So I think that just seeing some of that in this process could be helpful for our next steps as well.
Okay.
Hi, Jared. This is Jessica here in San Rafael. We do have Jared online, and we also have a member of the public that raised their hand right after public comment was closed. So if you want to give them the opportunity, happy to unmute them.
What's your question?
My question just was just how we're going to wrap this section up. Are we going to give actually feedback on which, if we're encouraging the alternative versus the draft, or are we ready to? I just didn't know what your plans were for moving forward on that.
Go ahead.
Just a question.
Yeah. Yes, or whatever else you might want to add as we go forward from here. They weren't asked for an extra recommendation, but it was just to get feedback so that when they go to the full board.
Okay, so you think we're good on that then?
I think, but if you have something.
No, I'm actually good. I think it's just like a phenomenally. A comment is that this is exactly the kind of thing that the board should be weighing in on, dealing with the rate kind of impact versus our kind of renewable goals. So I appreciate I appreciate framing. As I said, my big goal was to frame the decision just a little more crisply, so we can really drive to a decision. That's really my biggest thing.
Okay, thank you. And then since we've gone back around technically for comments, Director Andres, anything from Senator Fell for comment that you may want to add?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I agree with the comments that, we want to frame this a little more crisply. So if I could make a couple of just suggestions. One is to show the breakout over time between long-term, the percentage of load that's under long-term contract versus short-term contract. And then also over time, the resource adequacy percentage, the percent that's clean, or however you want to phrase it, the percent that's natural gas over time. That would be helpful to see. I think that will help the board understand what the differences are between the two plans, the preferred and the draft alternative plans. And I do think it's worth, on a future agenda, maybe we'll deal with this in the workshop. I do think it's important to think about just the renewable content of the light green, because that's, I think, we're all worried about cost. And so is there an alternative there that would reduce our costs? And that's a conversation that I think would be very interesting to have.
Is it okay?
And lastly on the RA, there's something on our website that says, our goal is to get to 50% clean RA by 2030. So if that's not reflected in the IRP or in some other board document, I think we should look at what we're saying publicly on the website as well with respect to clean RA.
Is it okay?
Thank you.
Is it okay if I make a comment to the technical committee? And I apologize if we didn't present this clearly. I think it will be difficult for us to take two portfolios to the full board because that will be essentially like 2 weeks before the deadline. So I think our preference is to bring one for approval so that we can draft the narrative that is rather lengthy. But if the technical committee would prefer that we bring two for the full board for consideration, I think we're looking at guidance for which one to bring to the full board. But we could go either way.
I think that if I can, and I don't want to speak for other people, but I think the issue or the concern may be just that as we read it, I don't think I was clear what the alternative was to that page that we showed. So I think it was on page in the report, the staff report. It was the last page of the actual, of the actual report, not the. So I think that needs to be clear to the whole board when they're making this decision. But I want to. I think we got everybody's comments. So I'm just going to summarize what I heard, and then we'll go back to public comment. So what I heard was just from Senator Phil was natural gas over time. The summary of the comment was natural gas over time. What percentage it's going to remain as. Over here from Director Murphy, we had comments about economic impact forward. We've done past, but looking forward might be part of our recommendation. And then say one more time your last comment. I'm sorry, I lost it just that fast.
Oh, no, my last comment was just about, I thought that was kind of a good, kind of goes against what you said, but basically it was like, oh, this is kind of a good policy decision the board should weigh in on, which I was to make sure it's really clear, that exactly what the different proposals are. If you want to weigh in, my personal comment is, I think the lower cost draft one is totally fine. I actually don't, I think that to me is a good thing because it's a lower ratepayer impact and still making progress. But it's nice to see an alternative only because you say, oh, here's the consequence of, drawing down our natural gas. It has a significant impact on rates. And that's kind of what you need to make that kind of call.
So to satisfy that, would it just a cost breakdown? Because it's just 2 years, right? We're talking about, it's a larger program, but we're talking about 2 years iteration here. So if they provided just a cost on it, would that be?
Yeah, maybe
that would help that.
Sorry. Yeah, maybe it's that graph that they showed kind of is helpful to kind of see, we just want to make sure that might be.
And I apologize. We certainly can present that we did the sensitivity analysis. I think it's more that as we're preparing an IRP for the board to approve, we have to give you the all the templates filled out for one option. So if the technical committee is okay with this, presenting the draft as the one for approval and then presenting the alternate sensitivity, which of course, if the full board decides to reject the piece, the preferred and move to the alternate, we'll iterate and do that. But yeah.
Thank you. And I think that's what I'm hearing just here. There's no vote to be done, but that's what I think I'm hearing here. But I think Senator Feld had chimed in at some point. There was additional there was a public comment or something to that effect.
Yes.
So
Alicia Minion.
okay. And if we can set the clock, please. And thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Okay,
can.
great. Thank you so much. So I have some comments and then questions, and I know you guys, it's getting late, so I'm open to getting answers later. But number one, the IRP, which after all of your great questions, it's sounding like it's not very meaningful. It's just sort of this check the box thing. But I'm assuming that there is some good intent behind the requirement. And I was wondering, does the staff track deviations from the IRP? So in the past and then prospectively, that might be good. Also, I'm interested in knowing when this goes to the board, if there's going to be a red line version so the public can see what's the difference between the previous IRP and the enhancements and the adjustments you make for the August submission. And then also, I'm a proponent of the lower cost portfolio, but in that lower cost portfolio, I'm just curious, will there be more acquisition of those bundled contracts with the recs? And when you were planning or designing these two alternatives, staff mentioned scarcity, and I'm just wondering, to what extent did the staff consider the in terms of, are there really developers out there that are going to kind of are you going to have any issue procuring if there's a scarcity in developers or a scarcity in the energy itself that you plan on procuring? And I'm hearing a lot of long-term contracts, and is that the movement for all CCAs? Is this going to create more price competition because everybody wants longer term contracts? And then we also have about 30 billion in prepaid energy bonds that are tied to existing PPAs. So but it would be great to have more information on the long-term front. And then lastly, the load, in consideration of data centers. Just want you to know that Solano County, there was campaign season for Board of Supervisors seat, and California Forever, which is wanting to build like a 400,000 person city in Solano County, they were influencing the Board of Supervisors seat election, and one of the contributors to a PAC was named Solano Data Center LLC. So I'm hoping the staff will be monitoring for potential hyperscale data centers in Solano County, which is a member of MCE. And I apologize for throwing all this out at you at once.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I'll bring it back to the board. So I think I just want to check in with staff. Did we get a good summation of what the comments were from the board members? There was Senator Fell. We went through them. So if we have that litany, I think what we're suggesting, and the board can chime in if I say this wrong, these are enhancements to the report that would go, enhancements from our perspective, to the full board when they receive the larger report. We do understand that here today, the majority of us, and someone disagrees, shake your head, would like the draft report, the one that staff is recommending. If I've said that incorrectly, someone please chime in. We'll do a vote if we need to, but I think that's what we're recommending we move forward with. Okay. So I think we have some good direction there. All right, great. Okay. And with that, then we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is because we pulled two, number 8 and 9, we're at number 10, which is committee and staff matters.
Chair, I think we need to go back when the 2026
Did I miss one?
season is the next one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Correct. Good point. Number 7, 2026 open season discussion.
we're just going to swap out some name tags really quick. Thanks for the patience. All right. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. It's okay that I get started. My name is Steve Mariani. I'm Manager of Power Resources at MCE. I'll be sharing this presentation with Devin Hannell, one of our new procurement team members. This update is related to our upcoming open season 2026 process. We gave a brief preview of this at the May TechCom, so this is also a natural follow-up to the previous presentation on IRP, because this is the process how MCE goes about making our resources plans come to reality by contracting for new long-term agreements to add into our portfolio. Next slide, please. So what is open season? Well, as the name suggests, it's our all-source solicitation for long-term, large-scale renewable energy and storage projects. We utilize open season to build out our long-term portfolio and achieve our agency goals, as well as meet regulatory obligations, support new resource development, and secure benefits that come with having long-term PPAs in our portfolio. We've discussed this at numerous meetings recently, but in short, these long-term PPAs allow MCE to secure all of the benefits of an energy and or storage project, including PCC1 energy supply, resource adequacy, and the market revenues, all at a fixed price over a long-term contract, typically lasting between 10 to 20 years. Next slide, please. This slide should also look familiar. We've showed iterations of it, and it was in the previous deck. In the previous deck, it had the planned capacity build out. So what you're looking at here is just what's historically been signed through long-term contracts. And I wanted to highlight that, a majority of these new contracts that we've signed, as you can see in the middle, it's 1,100 megawatts of new renewables built statewide. It's also 638 megawatts of renewable energy just signed in the last 5 years. These have largely come through our open season process. So this is our typical once per year solicitation. We also have signed 7 long-term contracts for storage, totaling 774 megawatts. And this is important because it's allowing us to shift renewable energy out of the midday period where solar is producing and help meet peak demand and add to grid reliability. And on the left, I didn't cover that figure, but we've shown it in the past that currently in 2026, we have 77.5% of our renewable energy needs being met through long-term contract. Next slide, please. These have also been alluded to a few times, and this slide has come up before, but these are the historic procurement mandates that have been issued by the California Public Utilities Commission, and the most recent one being issued in March of this year. So our open season process also helps us to procure to meet these procurement mandates. Our needs are also primarily driven by our portfolio targets, but these procurement mandates are also what keep us in compliance and what we are going after partially through the open season. And as a quick note on the latest procurement order, they have mandated that some of the new procurement come from either clean firm resources or from long duration storage. And both of these types of resources must be online by June of 2032. Just to quickly define, clean firm resources are RPS eligible renewable resources that are not weather dependent or use limited, and on an annual basis, they can generate power at least 80% of their maximum potential capacity. Now, that's a lot of words, but it ties back to what we were discussing earlier with nameplate capacity. So essentially that means it can generate 80% of its nameplate capacity throughout the year. So the main type of resource that fits into this bucket is geothermal, which we've also brought up a few times so far. So this is going to be the primary target in terms of resource type for this bucket. And then long duration storage, to define that is a resource that can store energy for a minimum of 8 hours at its maximum capacity. So that is twice the length of the typical battery that we've signed in the last few years of 4-hour duration. Next slide, please. So that brings me to our targets for this year's open season. Our preferred resources this year include at the top wind and geothermal resources. These are complementary to our current solar-rich portfolio. So this is why this is a primary target for us this year. It also comports with the IRP targets that we're projecting. However, if we're not able to find cost-effective offers for wind and geothermal, both of which are pretty scarce resources here in California, we will look to other technologies that also generate PCC1 energy. This includes solar resources, but this year, as in years past, we will be requiring that solar resources must be paired with energy storage so that it's a better fit for our portfolio. We will also be seeking offers for long duration storage that would be eligible to fill the procurement mandate need that I mentioned in the last slide. And in the fourth bullet where I say comparable options for procurement order, that's because we have optionality with that procurement mandate. We could either go after clean firm or we could go after long duration storage to meet compliance. And so we'll be looking to make sure that our decision is based on the most cost effective way for MCE both to meet our portfolio needs but also meet compliance. And while our open season primarily has resulted in new build projects, we will also be accepting offers for existing and repowered projects. These are especially important because they allow for bringing in those resources that are scarcer. So wind resources in particular, we will see those often get repowered at the end of their life. We think that's an important thing to continue those resources generating on California's grid. So we will also be accepting offers for those types of resources. And finally, this is a sort of wonky category, but in this process, we will also be accepting offers for projects that are seeking to enter into the CAISO, this is the grid operator, into their next interconnection study process. That's called Cluster 16, and they study all of these projects in clusters to start. And so couple of years back, the CAISO introduced a new paradigm wherein they're looking to sort of pre-screen projects that are going into the study process so that they cut down on the amount of projects that go in. This is supposed to relieve some of the bottlenecks that they've seen in recent years. So they score projects on two parameters. One is general viability, if the project has attained site control, has gone through some of the permitting, and the other piece is whether they have interest from potential off-takers such as MCE. So they allocate points to entities like MCE so that we can then give to these projects called commercial interest points. That helps them get into the interconnection process and get studied. And again, by cutting down on the number of projects that get studied, the hope is that those get through the process faster. So we will be seeking offers for these early stage projects. They have not been studied yet, but it is a good opportunity for MCE to kind of get an early foot in the door with some projects. And usually in return for these points, we would get some form of exclusivity or right of first offer on the project once it gets built. So we've already started talking to folks who may have those projects coming in. So we will fold that into this solicitation process. With that, I will pass it over to Devin, who's going to cover a little bit more about how the process for open season works.
Thank you, Stephen. Hello, members of the technical committee. My name is Devin Hannell. I joined MCE's procurement team at the end of January, and I'm primarily focused on supporting our long-term procurement efforts. So this slide lays out the general process for the open season. Right now, we're in step 1, where we'll be talking to bidders, as well as our network of developers that we've worked with in the past, as well as potential new developers in the process, getting the word out, and that whether that be through social media. We also had an email announcement go out this Tuesday. So this period will kind of culminate on June 17th, so in a couple weeks, when the RFO, or request for offer, will go live on MCE's website. There, bidders will be able to view submission materials, and after that, we would, the next step in the process, that would culminate in July 20th, so about a month later, where all offers will be due through the website submission portal. At that time, we would then evaluate those offers over the next couple months, and using kind of market forecasts as well as qualitative due diligence that we perform to quantify project net benefits to MCE. At that point, we would identify projects that we'd like to advance to a short list and enter exclusive negotiations for. That would require management approval to move forward with that list. Once we have those projects identified and we're in the exclusive negotiating phase, we would round out those negotiations into, we're thinking early 2027. And then at that point, once those contracts are ready to be signed, we would approach the technical committee for full approval on those contracts. Next slide, please. So this slide, excuse me, is a general framework for how we will be assessing projects through open season. Lays out a bunch of different categories that we'll be looking at. The offer submissions require bidders to disclose information kind of related to these categories, as well as the risks that are associated with them. The goal here is to kind of assess overall project viability and likelihood of success, as well as be able to kind of quantify the value to MCE and its ratepayers. The submission materials that we have been enhanced and refined over the last few weeks here, and we're hoping that it makes for a smooth evaluation process, and then that would transition into negotiations that would also be smooth as well. Next slide, please. So depicted here is the MCE's load supply balance in the year 2032 across the 4 seasons. The green line is our load shape on a month-hour average. The orange shape is our generation supply, and this includes all supply that we have contracted for currently. We chose 2032 because that is when all of our resources that we currently have contracted for will be online or are planned to be online. One of the main goals of the open season this year is to address some of the gaps we have, the blank spaces in these graphs, and that's kind of the deficits between our generation and our load. Primarily, you can see in non-solar generating hours, as well as in winter months. We have gaps that we'd like to address. Some of the resources Stephen mentioned, wind, geothermal, and long-duration storage, all provide benefits towards this effort. So we are excited to evaluate those resources and see how they will fit within the portfolio. Next slide, please. So lastly, this is the schedule for the open season process. The launch date, as I mentioned before, is in a couple weeks on June 17th. That's when all the materials will be released to bidders. The offers will be due on July 20th. At that point, we will then start evaluating the projects and moving towards a short list, and that should go through the end of Q3 of this year. At that point, once we receive approval on the short list, we would move forward into negotiations, and that should go through early 2027. Finally, again, to reiterate, we would come to the technical committee in a future meeting and request approval on those contracts and provide more details on the projects that have been selected. Next slide, please. And thank you very much. That's all we have planned today for the open season topic, but please let us know if you have questions or comments.
Okay, thank you very much for the report. I'm starting in San Rafael just because we have one director there. So in San Rafael, do we have any comments? And I think we'll try and do questions and comments just to if we can, if that's okay. We'll just because it's so please, question or comment.
Great, thank you for the overview. I don't really have a whole lot of comments or questions, although I'll ask them, but I probably sense that you probably can't answer them. Any sense of like what percentage of our load we're going out for here, or is that confidential that we're trying to fulfill?
I'd say we generally historically have signed between 1 and 300 megawatts from these open seasons in the past. I think that kind of keeps with some of the risk management policies we try and follow. So we're not signing contracts all at the same time during one sort of point in time pricing environment. So I'd say that's probably an accurate reflection of where we'll be this year, along with bandwidth for negotiating contracts. We'll try and probably do multiple to again promote diversity in our suppliers, and so that's generally the guidance we're going with for our volume targets this year.
Great, thank you. No further questions.
Okay, thank you from San Rafael. Bringing it back to Concord. Any questions or comments? locally? Okay, so hearing none here, and we did do questions and comments. We'll go to the public if there's any public comments in San Rafael.
No members of the public here in San Rafael.
Thank you. And then members of the public here in Concord, there are none here, and we'll go online.
I see no raised hands, Chair.
Okay. All right, and then I'll bring it back to us. I just want to thank for the report. No action here, so just thank you for letting us receive that. And then we'll go to the item that I skipped ahead to, which was committee and staff matters. Anything in San Rafael?
None, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bringing it back to Concord, to staff, the committee. Okay, the last one on the agenda is adjournment. So with that, I will adjourn the meeting, and we'll see everybody in about a month. But I think we do have I heard there's a meeting coming up. Go ahead, CEO.
The workshop?
Yeah, I heard you mentioned it twice. I think you
mentioned Yes, thank you. Thank you for bringing it up. Again, we're really looking at going out to invite, of course, all the board members, and we have a little bit of a guidance for your consideration, to be open to hear everything, and you can ask questions, what have you. We're sending a wide net out there from all the participants and all the folks that have been commenting at board and committee meetings in the past year. We would love to see all of them to provide, factual input, questions, and we have a lot of options, like we talked about a little bit today. At the end of the day, it's rates. So, and hopefully together we'll get there in bringing the core policy development for the board consideration on how do we move to the future in a flexible environment.
Thank you very much. And then our next meeting will be, it looks like July 3rd, unless there's some other additional.
That would likely be rescheduled due to
Understood.
holiday.
That's the current scheduled one, right? That's what we have scheduled.
Members and the public will be notified of that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, everyone, then. Thank you. Bye-bye.